I've always loved walking in the park in the mornings. It was the only place where I could escape the hustle and bustle of the city. Here, among the old trees and the sounds of nature, I felt at peace with my thoughts. After a long day filled with the noise of cars and other people's voices, the silence felt like salvation to me. But that day, something was different. I was walking along a familiar path, enjoying the freshness of the autumn morning. The air was cool but pleasant. The end. A light breeze lifted the leaves, scattering them across the paths, as if someone had carefully adorned each tree. It seemed like the whole park was frozen, immersed in its own world, until I saw her. The woman was sitting on a bench, barely noticeable amidst the dense greenery. I rarely encountered people here, especially at that time. Something about her caught my attention. She was elegant. Her posture radiated confidence. Yet there was a hidden sadness in the way she sat. I felt an inexplicable urge to approach her, to find out what had brought her here on a morning walk just like mine. It was strange because I wasn't used to seeking out conversation, especially during these moments when I craved solitude. As I got closer, she looked up. There was more than just polite interest in her gaze. Something deeper. Our eyes met briefly, and I felt something click inside me, as if in that instant we were bound by an invisible thread. I tried to speak, not knowing why I felt compelled to make this move. "Good morning," I said, stepping a bit closer. My voice sounded unexpectedly confident, though I didn't feel sure of myself at all. "Good morning," she replied, smiling slightly, though the shadow of sadness still lingered in her eyes. I didn't know what to say next, but something about her presence made me stay. Suddenly, I realized I felt strange, as if this meeting had been inevitable. I sat down on a bench opposite her, not daring to cross the invisible boundary between us. We sat in silence, and I felt the tension between us grow, though I didn't understand why. It wasn't the awkward silence that often occurs between strangers, but something else. Warm, almost comforting. "Do you come here often?" I asked, trying to break the tension. She looked at me as if she was carefully considering her answer. "Yes, I love this place," she finally replied. "It's quiet here, and you can forget about everything happening outside the park." I nodded, understanding her words all too well. We fell silent again, but now the silence was pleasant. It felt like we both sensed something more than just curiosity about one another. This was a meeting that left me with a feeling of inevitability. The next day, I returned to the park, unsure if I would see her again. Yesterday's encounter had lodged itself in my mind, refusing to let go. It seemed like it had all been some kind of strange dream. Her gaze, the sense that we were connected by something more than just a random meeting. I wandered along the familiar paths, and when I reached the same bench where we had met the day before, she wasn't there. I felt a slight pang of disappointment, not fully understanding why. Maybe I wanted to continue that strange but intriguing conversation, to learn more about her. But just as I was about to take a few more steps, I saw her. She was standing a little further away, near a small fountain hidden among the trees. Her gaze was distant, as if she was lost in thought, trying to hide from the world. But when I approached, she turned around, and a soft smile appeared on her face. "You came back," she said, her voice as gentle as the morning breeze brushing against our faces. "Yes, I couldn't resist," I admitted, feeling a slight nervousness. "It seems this park has become a sanctuary for both of us." She smiled again, but there was still something deeply hidden in her eyes, something she didn't want to reveal. I understood that, but I didn't want to push. "It's always so peaceful here," she said, almost as if apologizing for her aloofness. "Sometimes silence is all you need to bring your thoughts in order." I nodded, stepping closer. Our eyes met again, and I felt the strange tension between us rise once more. Difficult to describe. It was something more than just mutual attraction. It was the sense that we stood on the threshold of something important, something that would change us both. We continued walking through the park together without speaking any unnecessary words. Occasionally, our hands would accidentally brush against each other, and each time it felt like a light electric shock. My heart started beating faster. but I didn't understand what it meant. Finally, we stopped under an old oak tree, where the sunlight filtered through the thick leaves, casting a soft, golden light around us. She looked at me, and there was something in her gaze that I couldn't ignore. I stepped closer, almost without thinking, giving in to some inner impulse. He didn't pull away, and I felt our breaths synchronize. I leaned in closer, and in the next moment, our lips met in a gentle kiss. It wasn't the kind of passionate impulse one might expect, but a quiet and warm moment, as if we had both been waiting for it for a long time, but were too afraid to make the first move. The kiss lasted only a moment, but it left a sense of something important. I pulled back, looking into her eyes, and saw something that couldn't be expressed in words. This kiss wasn't just a gesture. It was a promise of something more than just a chance meeting. We remained silent, but inside, emotions were swirling that I couldn't control. Our meetings in the park became a habit, but with each passing day, I could feel that something between us was changing. Michelle remained a mystery to me. Her smile was sincere, her words simple, but behind it all, there was always something more. It was as though she was trying to keep her distance. Even as we grew closer, the tension between us was growing, and I could no longer ignore it. One evening, as the sun was nearly hidden behind the horizon, we were once again walking through the park. This time, the conversation didn't flow as easily as it usually did. Michelle seemed distracted, her thoughts far away. I could feel it, but didn't want to press her. We all carry the weight of our past, and I respected her space. Yet, in that moment, something shifted. "Jack," she said suddenly, stopping in the middle of the path. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but there was a determination in it. "I need to tell you something." I froze, trying to predict what would come next. Her eyes held a certain anxiety, and I felt my own body tense, waiting for something important. I had a complicated past. She began, avoiding my gaze, and it still haunts me. I've been trying to run away, to hide, to start over, but there are things that are not so easy to leave behind. I said nothing, giving her the time she needed to collect her thoughts. "You deserve to know the truth," Michelle continued, finally meeting my eyes. "I was married before. My husband was a man who introduced me to a world I never knew existed, a world full of danger. I tried to escape, to get away, but his influence still lingers in my life. I did. He didn't let me go easily." Her words hit me like a punch. I didn't know what to say. A whirlwind of emotions rose inside me: concern, pity, and confusion. I had no idea what her past involved, but I understood it was something far more complex than I had imagined. "What does this mean for us?" I asked, feeling the tension grow. Michelle looked away but then stepped closer to me. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I didn't want to drag you into this, Jack, but you've become close to me." Her voice trembled, closer than I ever expected. "And now I'm scared that my past might ruin what we're trying to build." I couldn't take the tension anymore. I stepped closer and gently took her hand. Her fingers were cold, but she didn't pull away. In that moment, I realized I could no longer look at her from the outside as if she were a closed book. "You're not alone, Michelle," I said softly, feeling that invisible connection between us strengthen once again. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with both fear and gratitude, and before I knew it, I leaned in and kissed her. This kiss was entirely different. It was filled with the words we hadn't said, with the emotions we were afraid to admit. It wasn't a kiss of passion, but one of tenderness, a way to show her that I was here, beside her, no matter what. When our lips parted, I looked into her eyes. Now I knew for sure. Her past was dark, but I wasn't going to let it destroy our present. After that last conversation with Michelle, I couldn't shake the thought of her past and how it continued to haunt her. Our meetings continued, but each one felt like the calm before a storm, tense and foreshadowing something inevitable. I knew that her dark history would eventually intrude on our world and bring chaos with it. The only question was how we would handle it. One evening, when the park was nearly empty and the sun's rays gently filtered through the branches, I met her by the fountain. The look on her face was one of deep worry, and I immediately knew something had happened. Her gaze was filled with fear, and her hands were trembling slightly. She slowly raised her eyes to mine, and I saw the terror in them. "He found me, Jack," she said quietly, but there was a certain firmness in her voice. "My ex-husband. He knows where I am." Chill ran down my spine. Everything she had spoken of before suddenly became real. She hadn't just been hiding in this park. She hadn't just been trying to escape her past. She was running from a real threat. "What does he want?" I asked, trying to stay calm, though inside I was boiling with anxiety. "He wants me back," she said, barely holding back tears. "But I won't go back to him. I fought too hard for my freedom. I won't let him control my life again." I stepped closer and hugged her. Her body was tense, like a tightly wound string ready to snap at any moment. She sighed, relaxing slightly in my arms, but I knew that a simple embrace wasn't enough to take away the fear. We were standing on the brink of something much bigger than I could have anticipated. "We'll handle this," I whispered in her ear. "I won't let him hurt you." She lifted her eyes, full of gratitude, but I could sense that this was more than just her fear. It was a battle for her life, for the right to be herself, for the chance to start over. I saw it in her gaze and knew that I was faced with a choice. Either stand by her to the end or leave her to face her past alone. Michelle looked at me, her face full of determination. "I don't want to drag you into this, Jack. It's too dangerous." But I had already made my decision. My feelings for her were stronger than my fear. I couldn't leave her alone in this fight. "You're not alone," I said, looking her straight in the eyes. "We'll face this together." "I'm not backing down." She remained silent, gazing at me, then gently placed her hand on mine. In that moment, I understood that we had both been through so much, and now we had a chance to build something new. Despite all the threats that lay before us, we stood there for a few more moments, feeling the tension dissolve into the evening air. I knew a battle awaited us, but I was ready to fight for her, for us, for this new beginning. We walked deeper into the park, away from the noise of the city, knowing that the decision had already been made.